All right, so I'm just gonna go ahead and jump in, just so it doesn't look odd. Below me, I have my computer. I have some sort of quotes next to me as well, so I might occasionally look down. But I'm gonna be talking about my research proposal and essentially the process of where this came from, what I've done so far to sort of pilot a study into this investigation, and some findings and takeaways that I have currently. Just sort of the framework of where my research problem came from. Um, as an educator, I certainly hear this phrase more often than I would like to, but students tend to say something to the effect of, I can't draw, or, I can't do this, or I'm not creative. And those are things that, A, are kind of, ashamed to hear as an art teacher, right? You want everyone to sort of, A, identify their creative ability, B, be able to express it and to support it and grow from it and learn with it. Um, but I always attributed that for people that say they can't do those things. Somehow, in like almost like a TV flashback in their elementary years, some adult or teacher or someone told them they can't draw or weren't doing it right, and so they lost confidence in trying to express themselves creatively and sort of that traditional sense of drawing, and just never developed any further. So I always thought in my head that's where that stuff came from. But for the students of today, where digital media and social platforms have sort of taken over the world, and there's content creators, something uh, as interesting as that, as a new word that has existed as far as to explain people on a path. How do they view creativity now? Is it still within these sort of traditional mindsets of draftsmanship, working through traditional art mediums, or is it more expressive through what has become our digital landscape and sort of production and all of this stuff? That really led me into this investigation of what is creativity for our students, and how can we sort of help them identify their own creative abilities. And that became my central research question, was just that. How can students identify their creative abilities? Because though we teach art classes, though that may be the goal for all of us, um, it's not always something that's the goal for our students. They don't view it that way. Sometimes they just uh, really are there because they have to be there, or they need to be there, and it isn't something that they naturally think they have as a gift. So how can we turn that and have them, even if they might not be the greatest drawer, right, see worth and value to their own individual skill sets and talents? So just sort of moving past what was that initial question led me into some of my research. And I have a couple that I want to point out here. So I'm just going to list the authors' names, not the article per se, but the authors responsible, and sort of talk about some of their quotes. So Minucci and Young were focusing on knowledge breadth and knowledge depth, which are phrases, if anyone's ever dealt with College Board or AP Art, that used to be their standard for submission to an AP portfolio, right? You had to build art depth and breadth through your portfolio. That's always what they told you when you're submitting to schools and stuff like that. But through this concept, essentially what they talked about was that knowledge depth in the concept of working in the workplace, right, in the professional world, in a career path. Knowledge depth is valuable at the beginning of your career because you are so willing to dive deep into the content, to understand it from all avenues and facets. So you're acceptable and open to new ideas and trying different things. And that early phase is where you establish sort of your understanding of the content to a mastery level, right? And they talk about how as you get to the later stages of your career, right, where knowledge breadth becomes a more valuable thing, where there's this sort of known understanding of what your content is, and instead it's how can you connect to different domains and schemas and pull from these different areas and really show that your thing, right, sort of falls into place or can be referenced from other things. So that knowledge breadth becomes more valuable. And I thought that was an interesting thing because in the workplace, I think for our students, a lot of times they think it's this one track form of expression that's going to be consistent and constant forever. And it's just not the case. And there's studies that prove that. One other one I wanted to point out was from Karwowski. I didn't make sure I said that right. And Bagetto. And they talked about this creative behavior agentic action model. And essentially what it was just saying, it was trying to identify what's that relationship between creative confidence, creative potential, sort of the value of what is creative, and ultimately leading to creative behaviors. So they have this model structure that essentially says any creative potential that exists, which most creativity tests actually try to show in some fashion, but it doesn't always relate to creative behaviors. And so essentially it puts up that these two other variables exist between creative confidence and value of creativity, right? Someone has to find value either individually or from outside influence that what they're doing is worthwhile, and that will build their confidence into that form of expression, ultimately to the point to where it becomes a behavior, right, where it's sort of a natural act. It's self-sufficient. It is what it is going to be, right? It's a constant. So this proposal I like because I think those things are that kids again, don't often think about. They think they're, the Michelangelos of the world, right? That you have natural talent and therefore you are then going to be some sort of artist or artist type person. But a lot of it really comes from those secondary phases, right? Of being confident in what you're doing, finding it worthwhile either for yourself as a need to create, or being told that what you're doing is worthwhile through support of means, having some sort of livelihood based off of it. These are all things that I think build into what artists are. So I like these sort of general mindsets. I thought they were really interesting. One other one, I believe by, I want to make sure I get their names right again. Choi and Bim Morowitz talked about how in our current digital landscape, this term of digital production is more prominent through these social media platforms. And it's really resulted into some interesting investigations, just sort of talking about how video production is more viewed creatively than sort of written production, right? Sort of language itself has been taking a back seat to what is now a video as being the premier way of expression creatively. And it makes sense for young people how that sort of dominates their landscape. So all of these things came into my mind as I started to investigate further, and this led to essentially what my methodologies was to do an action-based research investigation. And it's similar. It's so similar to sort of teaching strategies of trying something, seeing how the kids respond, and adjusting from it. So that's what I went with as far as my terms of investigation. So for my pilot study, I provided 3 questions for students to answer. Just sort of generally, the kids that I had sort of a little more time with that were in my classes, I gave them a second component where I showed them references of all sort of creative innovators throughout a variety of fields, science, technology-based, doctors, business people, and I tried to provide resources that not only talked about professional successes of male achievements, but also women within these fields that do outstanding things, people of color. I really tried my best to give a wide variety of resources of what creativity can sort of stretch beyond if you think of it outside of traditional art or drawing-based context. So for my kids that I had a little more time with, they got to engage in this sort of discussion, and then I sort of had them revisit trying to think about what those initial questions were, which asked, do you find yourself personally creative? How would you define creativity? And, what does creativity look like? What's a creative individual to you? So from these, I think I had a lot of varied responses. I asked a couple of colleagues' classes, their students, to help me in sort of testing out this research and gathering data. And what I found is that most of the students at my school have a very good understanding of what creativity is. It's about generating new ideas, breaking outside of the norms, trying to think outside of the box. These are all phrases I heard a lot. And I think what started to surprise me is that their vision of creativity I thought might be like, TV show based reference, the artist that's, all frazzled and running around, or Miss Frizzle if you think like Magic School Bus. Someone did say that. But actually, no, a lot of them said that it could be anyone. Anyone has the ability, the potential, the capability of being expressive to this extent, right? And what I found is that most of the students actually thought that they were creative to some degree. Some of them started to get into an area that referenced my resources, talking about effort, the time that's needed. If they put in the time, or if they really try, they can be creative. Or sometimes when they turn it on type of thing. And I think this is interesting takeaways for me because it helped me to realize that the students get it, right? They understand what creativity is. It's still something that has been ingrained well enough throughout their, academic years that they understand that concept. But I think what I found from this is that a lot of them that had the chance to work a little more with myself and my sort of control group of being shown other influential people in different mediums and different fields. I started to hear a lot about what they do. Some people actually do smithing and work in a forge and do like, full on masonry. Some people are really into coding. They've made several apps. They work for, parents' companies. They have side jobs. It was impressive. They build models. Some people are really spend their time into like dance, and they really spend their time into learning an instrument and being trained and taking outside classes and resources. So it was really cool to hear all these things that these kids do. That isn't something that's normally forthcoming from them, right? And I think that a lot of them need support as far as understanding that that stuff is worthwhile, right? That it seems to be viewed not just as like a practice or as a hobby or a skill to gain, but to be viewed as a thing that you can be creative with, that you can change and think differently with. Overall, my sort of takeaway is that I think extra support is certainly needed and more outlets for them to try and find ways to connect and express their creative means. And I think the more that you can support that as an endeavor that they find value within. And I think whether they have it or not, I think a stance that I learned from this research is that that's something I can provide. I can provide that support, that nurture sort of perspective, that voice in the room for them that says to continue to go forward, to continue making those efforts to do it for themselves, that it has worth. And I think that's a lot of what these kids need as far as takeaway is they need to be told that what they're doing is worthwhile, right? That their time's not being wasted, that putting in effort has value. And that's something that I hope I can be able to start to change for my students based off of this research. I don't think this research is done as creativity is changing and our landscape is changing, but I definitely think that that's the stance that I'm currently taking away from this is that I can be someone that provides the value in that model, thinking about taking creative potential, taking that confidence, hopefully grows from me presenting that sort of support and ultimately leading to a lot of people with a lot of creative behaviors.